The following program is a Town of Colonie television production of the William K. Sanford Town Library.
Welcome to Getting to Know You. I'm your host, Robert Jaquay. On today's program, we're going to be talking with Kevin Fletcher, who is the Executive Director of Audubon International. And although it has international in the title, it has very local roots. So let's go meet Kevin and find out more. Kevin, welcome and thanks for agreeing to be on the show today.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, before we start talking about Audubon International, let's have our viewers know a little bit more about you, where you came from and how you got to where you are right now.
Sure. I'm actually from the Western New York area and ended up finding my way to this region as a graduate of RPI. And went through a program there that was called the Environmental Management Policy Program. It's now no longer there, no fault of mine. And ended up staying at RPI and finishing my doctorate through the management school there, and kind of looking at the intersection of organizations and the environment and kind of society. At the time, I was wearing too many hats and doing too many jobs, and sort of found my way into this organization, Audubon International, and have been working there for 6 years, but working as the executive director for the last year.
Okay, now in my research and going on your webpage, and we'll put the webpage up so others can go there, I see that the Audubon International has a very interesting local history connection in terms of its origin.
Absolutely. We're actually incorporated as the Audubon Society of New York State. There are, what most people don't know, there are over 500 Audubon societies in the country. Most of them are chapters or affiliates of the National Audubon Society. What most people are aware of focus on bird conservation. Oftentimes they're smaller groups that are just interested in bird watching and being active in their communities. We were reincorporated 20 years ago. The original Audubon Society of New York State was founded in the late 1800s and actually was sort of a start or precursor of the Audubon movement, and kind of laid in disrepair throughout most of the 20th century. In the late 1980s, a group of folks reincorporated the Audubon Society of New York State with an interest to really deliver educational programs and environmental programs at the grassroots level, which is really the nature of the Audubon movement, is individual involvement with environmental initiatives. We've been operating as Audubon International for the better part of 17 years or so, simply because we have program members outside of New York State. We work in just about all 50 states and 24 countries right now.
And I'm reading your bio or your introduction on the webpage. I mean, you mentioned such names as Teddy Roosevelt, obviously a leader in this area. And what was the group that started to reformulate? Were they just environmentalists? Did they do the history search and all that, or don't you know exactly?
They were actually the original board of the Audubon Society of New York State. Was a collection of folks within the greater capital region, most of whom were involved in the environmental movement in one way, shape, or form. The founder of the organization, Ron Dodson, who at the time was working for the National Audubon Society and had a set of programs that, working with folks within the community and working with the DEC and others, that he was really interested in trying to expand beyond what was capable in his work with the National Audubon Society. And so the Audubon Society of New York really was as I said before, an organization that was focused on that kind of grassroots education. We don't do lobbying. We're not involved in that kind of lobbying work. We're sort of a way to think of what we do as adult education. We're a little mini university of sorts, where we're trying to provide people where they live and where they work, where they play in their communities, with the tools, the education, the assistance through our programs to really make a difference in those places. So it's kind of built on the concept that protecting far-off Amazonian jungles is important, but there's nature all around us.
Right.
And we have to really look at the impacts that we have as humans within our own communities, in and around our own homes and where we work. and take steps to really try to address those.
I mean, hasn't one of the great challenges been always the sort of like integration of the industrial society into an environmental society and trying to have it be more balanced? I know the word balance was used a lot. And, I know the challenges are awfully great because this is what we run on in terms of industry and commerce, and yet protecting the environment and securing it is really important.
If you really look at the environmental movement, kind of the history of environmentalism in the United States in particular, we've gone through a set of kind of periods. We had a period within the early 1900s up through about World War II where the Industrial Revolution really took hold. There was a concept that nature was limitless.
Right.
We weren't concerned about where pipes for effluent or pollution were going into streams because nature will take care of it. It'll absorb it. In the 60s, with the social movement of the 60s, both for human rights, also came the environmental movement. And the environmental movement, as most people think of it, was really born during the 1960s revolution. 1970, the Environmental Protection Agency was created.
Okay.
The first Earth Day was created. And if you really, you look at it as a great graphic, if you look at the rise of environmental regulations and laws from 1970 to about the mid-80s, the first 100 years or so, it's pretty flat. And in 1970, it just spikes because the initial reaction by the public and by the federal Congress as well as state legislatures was to really address environmental issues as a legal concern, impacting or influencing the industrial segment or profit segment of society through regulation, laws, air pollution permits, etc. It was about the 1980s that there was more of a rise again, or a sort of rediscovery of the voluntary movement of the environmental movement. And that's really what we're focused on. We're looking at trying to take, whether it's a business or a community, you name it, really taking those stakeholders, those people, and trying to get them to, and working with them to take actions that go above and beyond what they would be legally required to do, the things that are the right things to do. So a lot of the regulatory or legal response that we see in the environmental movement really should be seen as a baseline performance. Should be minimum performance criteria. And what we're trying to do is saying, that is the minimum. There's much more that we can do, and that's what really voluntary environmentalism is all about.
Now, obviously, you're not a static organization, so you don't just sit there and waiting for people to just come into your life. You've got to be proactive, and you're out there. You talked about education. How do you go about it?
We operate in probably a little different way than most nonprofits do, I suppose. We are not heavily, have historically not been heavily foundation funded or even donor funded. We have a set of programs, educational programs that people can join, and there's an annual fee that's attached to those programs. And so, in a sense, we're kind of working as as a extension education organization, as a consultancy of sorts, where people are paying an annual fee to get the services, to get access to our staff, information. Some of our programs involve site visits to actually go on site in communities and businesses and really provide advice on how to take positive steps to protect water and wildlife and natural resources. And so we really get out and work with specific stakeholders. We've just, as a lot of organizations do, just gone through a strategic planning process, which will make most people's eyes glaze over. And we've really identified a set of areas where we're trying to make a difference. One is something we're calling our community initiative, which is really focused on working with town leaders, community leaders, planning boards, zoning boards, etc. We have one that's called our Eco Design and Development Initiative, where we're working with developers, as it would sound, architects, etc., and really trying to look at how we build new places in a way that minimizes impacts. We have another initiative we call our Environmental Stewardship and Management Initiative, which is kind of a catch-all. We work with a lot of different businesses, with schools, with youth groups, homeowners. And then a cornerstone of what we've done, we have something called our Golf and the Environment Initiative.
Yeah.
We've worked for over 15 years now in a pretty close partnership with a number of organizations within the golf community. One of our key supporters is the United States Golf Association. Tiger Woods just won the U.S. Open.
I guess so.
The USGA is the one who really is the governing body of golf, but they also have a lot of money that they put towards research and educational programs, in particular how grass is grown, how to use less water when growing grass, things like that. We're actually funded in part by a grant from the USGA along with the membership dollars from golf courses. We have over 2,000 golf courses around the United States that are working with our ecologists to really look at these kind of unique suburban and urban landscapes and say, how do you maximize wildlife habitat value? How do you reduce water use? How do you reduce chemical use? And provide a more of a natural resource within a community, within this operating business that they call golf. And so it's kind of an interesting relationship in some ways with my background, trying to impact an entire industry sector. The golf industry sector is kind of exciting work.
So you're not really that concerned with animals getting beaned by golf balls, right?
That's right. No more than in baseball, I suppose. But there are certainly legitimate concerns. You know, we started working with with these folks, with golf course superintendents, owners, et cetera, over 15 years ago. And at the time, and probably still, there were a number of folks within the environmental community that kind of questioned that philosophy. Mm-hmm. That's probably built a little bit on the kind of black hat, white hat philosophy that's really grown within our culture here of business being bad and environmental community is good, et cetera. But our philosophy, and certainly my philosophy, is you're talking about sustainability, you have to have all the stakeholders at the table. You have to really look at, we use a phrase often, which is the difference between preaching to the choir and trying to teach the sinners, if you will.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
so we're really trying not to preach to the choir. It's trying to find the folks who are making decisions on land use, on resource use, which is everybody, essentially, and trying to provide the information and tools to change behavior.
I'm going to go back, just a little bit for my benefit, and as far as how people become aware of you. I mean, is it just becoming a natural part of the mindset? I know you have to do seeker reviews and all kind of things when you're doing development. Are just people aware that this is a piece of it? Do you make cold calls? How does that happen?
Yes to all.
Okay.
I think, 'cause we certainly have a set of folks that we're going after that use the mentioned development. We kind of try to think of ourselves in some ways as any other business might, where you're really looking at who are the audiences or potential customers for environmental education, identifying those organizations that are really operating. We work pretty closely with groups like the Urban Land Institute.
Okay.
We work and are starting to build a relationship with the American Planning Association when it comes to our community initiative, and really trying to reach out and build awareness around the tools and programs that we have available. They're voluntary programs. There's nobody making anyone join our programs.
Right.
And so it really is, to some extent, a little bit of mix of guerrilla marketing 101 and good old common sense to try to reach out to the folks that we think we can provide help to and have them make the biggest impact or improvement to the environment and what they're doing.
I can't remember where I heard it, but somebody was sharing that it's now becoming trendy to deal with environmental issues, and I guess, thank goodness, because of all the stuff that's happening here. So, are people more peaked now than they have been?
Yeah, I've been, as I said, I've worked here in this organization for the last 6 years. And the last 18 months, we've seen more interest and activity in what we're doing. I think, you have a confluence of Al Gore's Nobel Prize and Oscar. You have Leonardo DiCaprio driving his, Prius. And so you have more of a public view of this. I think, terms like climate change have started to really bubble up in the public consciousness in a way that has never been, we've never seen before. When you look at the current presidential election, you think back 4 years ago, the environment wasn't out a topic.
Oh, no.
And you look now at the debates, and $4 gasoline certainly makes it a topic when you start talking about natural resource use and energy dependence, and it's all interconnected. Certainly. The spike in awareness, is exciting, and I think that for someone like myself who's been involved in this for 15 years in various ways, it's exciting to see kind of society pushing that way. But there are a lot of barriers to sort of move from idea to action, to really mobilize that and go beyond just interest and awareness to actually taking action or making a change of behavior and what we buy and where we live and how we plan our communities. And so it has to start somewhere for sure.
Yeah,
for sure.
and I guess I'm hearing that you start small and you can start individual, and then it will hopefully grow and extend. Because I mean, when have you not heard? I mean, people have been here. I've been here for almost 30 years, and I'm constantly saying, "Gee, I don't remember it being this hot at this point in the year. I don't remember the wind being so this." I mean, so people are really now associating things happening when you talk about climate change, but also pollution and all that kind of stuff going on here.
There's a you think about climate change and it's to some extent almost becoming a buzzword.
Yep.
But at the root of it, it's really a symptom of unsustainable natural resource use by our culture. In this particular case, we are it's an addiction to oil in the way we move around. We're kind of a professor I used to have called it the petrochemical treadmill, where you're kind of constantly moving on oil but never really get anywhere. And certainly we have the way our cars are built, our transportation system, everything else is so connected to the use of oil. The thing that's important is for people not to, I think, for the debate not to become one of vilifying one over the other. It's just a resource. There are a lot of people whose jobs depend on that resource, and that's where it becomes personal, I think. But things like climate change and as kind of a buzzword, it's a good buzzword as a starting point, but there certainly is a pretty large segment of the society that still has questions over it. It still has, wonders whether or not the science behind it is legitimate. It is. Right now, we're kind of at the point where the debate over whether mankind is impacting our environment at that level, that sort of climate level, the debate is done. The next set of questions is what to do about it now, which opens up a whole new can of worms because there are a lot of really challenging questions about really basic lifestyle choices that are connected to this problem. You look within the capital region, and right across the road here in the Northway, you see that twice a day at roughly 9 and 5 o'clock. And we are a society of commuters. We certainly depend on a lot of the things that basic food. Where does our food come from within the capital region? A large percentage of it is not locally grown, which means we're transporting it from somewhere else, which again is impacting the climate. So there's a lot of really basic decisions and fundamental decisions on how we live as a community that are integrally tied to issues of climate change or biodiversity loss, species loss, land use issues, things like that. And so you said something earlier, the very first, the starting point is with the individual, and that's so true. It comes down to not being overwhelmed, I think.
Well, it's overwhelming. It's huge.
It seems like it.
It's catastrophic. It's frightening.
It seems like it. And in some ways, we're a bit in crisis. Our communities are in crisis in many ways. And yet, the worst thing that could happen as a result of that perception of crisis is for people to throw their hands up and say, "Oh well, there's nothing we can do about it."
Yeah. Like I'll continue smoking because it's going to kill me someday.
Right, that's right. I guess the challenge of the smoking analogy is that it won't kill your kids or grandkids or great grandkids. What we're doing now could, when it comes to the environment and sort of looking at sustainability issues. So it's a lot of what we do is really focused on how to break it down into simple pieces. Ask simple questions. In all of our programs, the very first thing we do, and I would implore anyone who's watching this or listens to this later to do the same thing, just ask some basic questions. Where does my electricity come in my home? Where do I buy my food? Is it paper versus plastic? At least asking those questions is the first step. We call it an environmental audit. You're really just kind of taking stock of what's around you, how you your behavior, your choices, and then prioritizing and really looking at, okay, here are the things I know I can do pretty easy in changing behavior. The one that Al Gore used on the heels of The Inconvenient Truth was the light bulb change.
Yep.
Sort of the light bulb sort of became the poster child for the environment for a little bit there. But it was chosen for a reason. It's a simple kind of quick fix for someone to start thinking about these things. And I think the environmental movement, we've probably over the last 30 years made some mistakes. You look at kind of the messages that the environmental community puts out to society, and you have kind of the sky is falling message. You have the, what we call the charismatic megavertebrate, save the whale, save the panda sort of approach, where you're looking at a specific species as kind of an indicator. The rainforest approach, save something far off, without really reducing it to some simple questions that anyone can ask. And if every person decided to carpool one day a week, how much less gas would be used, how much less carbon dioxide would be used, and it's cumulative. So a lot of the things that we're talking about here depends on not individual action, but a collective of individual actions, which makes it a little bit of a challenge, but also offers some pretty simple solutions in the long run.
It's sustainability as well. I'm thinking of you get all these wonderful stories, whether it be in the paper or whether you get a spot on the evening news of, I think there was one last week about carpooling, and this whole mechanism of how it worked. And it might be trendy, and then all of a sudden you don't hear about it any longer. So it's really the sustainability of this kind of thing. It's getting people committed and continue to be committed.
Right.
And it amazes me too. Human nature is really interesting. That's a safe word to use. And so many people appear to need to be pushed right to the point of super crisis, where it really impacts them. I mean, the person who smokes all their life and all of a sudden they're in the hospital and they can't breathe. Okay. Why does it have to go that far? I mean, that's got to be a big challenge, because human nature wants to sort of like saying, let somebody else deal with it, right?
And if you look at, there's a pretty rich literature on change management, changing organizations and changing individual behavior in the psychology literature. And you kind of have two schools of thought, or two modes. You either have that incremental change, kind of ongoing slow change, or you have that lunging change, where something comes right up to a crisis point, and either at a societal level or individual level, you have to make a dramatic shift, dramatic change to be able to get to where you need to be. That is part of the challenge. In our own programs, we work with school principals and golf course superintendents and town supervisors and mayors, and these are just people that just happen to be in decision making, in a position to make decisions and various decisions. And a lot of what our programming is around, and our approach, is building that awareness and appreciation of the environment first. And when you start thinking about how special your own community is, and it's really easy to forget. Everyone wants to take vacations and go somewhere neat. But you look within the capital region, we have the Catskills not too far away, the Adirondacks, our own community, the Hudson Valley. It's easy to forget what makes your own community special.
Exactly.
And if you can reconnect people to what it is that makes where they live special, then the empathy or the caring part of this equation comes in, where it's not just taking an action because someone told me I should,
right,
but it is because you actually care about where you live. And that's part of the equation there, I think, is making that connection between the basic kind of practices and decisions that one makes, but also connecting it with the emotive part, or the human part of the equation as well. So
there's the economics of it, I guess, too. I mean, once again, business and capitalism and all that. Get rid of plastic bags, and then you're putting plastic manufacturers in danger or something, or plastic bottles. I mean, the communities that have gone to not having plastic bottles on the tables and all that stuff. So, I guess it's a real, it's like a tightrope as far as trying to balance.
And you have, that is one thing I'll say that, a lot of, again, our programs are really voluntary in nature, but the reason why we started working with communities is because some of the changes, I think, that have to take place are really changes at the level of policy, public policy. And rather than kind of go the lobbying angle, if you can get a community to buy in and bubble up from the start, so that those policy changes are really going to be embraced. That's sort of the philosophy of our Sustainable Communities program. Then you're going to have a more long-lasting sort of effort there. You have communities in towns in Canada that are banning incandescent light bulbs. So you will no longer be able to sell incandescent light bulbs versus a fluorescence in certain towns in Canada. We're at that policy level. They're saying we are going to enforce behavior change, which is what law is in the end anyways. So if you can find a way to mesh the kind of voluntary approaches to voluntarily accepting behavior change and choices that have to be made, and then make that voluntary choice sort of cement that within public policy, that's the best of all worlds, I think. At that point you have, whether it's a business, a golf course is an interesting example. A golf course is a little mini community in some ways, because especially in areas where you have members, they're either part owners or they have a vested interest in that course. You have owners that are managing the business of the course, so your point about the kind of business value of some of these things comes in. You have a golf course superintendent who is really a trained land manager. They're there to grow grass and to make sure that the surfaces are playable, but they also manage the entire landscape of the course. And so a lot of even working with a golf course is making sure that the golfers and the members are bought into changes, because if you're suddenly, a simple fix, for instance, on a golf course or anywhere, is not mowing down to a water feature. You want to have a high grass buffer zone between a water feature and the course, so that any sort of runoff of fertilizer or anything else that's been placed in the course is going through a thicker turf area and actually can be sucked into the plants, into the soil, and won't go in the water. Well, if the golfers and the members are used to it being mown down,
right,
and I'm going to lose my ball in there's a real education process to say, these are the reasons why we're making this change in the way we manage our course. It's no different than in a community. It's just a bigger scale. That's all it is.
As long as they don't take their own shears and start
That's
clipping
right.
away.
That's right.
Let's talk about wildlife habitats.
Sure.
What's happening?
Well, right now, there was a really interesting report that came out by it's called the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment Report by the United Nations. And they really looked at the state of the world, essentially. It's the state of ecosystems or habitats, if you will, around the globe. And they found some pretty alarming, at a global scale, alarming results. Whether it's coral reefs or rainforests or boreal forests, that there are a number of ecosystems around the world that are being stressed by human action. It again goes back to the fact that this is not about vilifying people, all right? And that's one of the challenges I think that we often face is when you start talking about, you make a statement like I just made that humans are impacting, causing the coral reefs to go. There is a kind of a reaction that people will have, which is, no, we're not. But the facts are there, and it's not meant to vilify any one particular group or otherwise. It just comes down to choices. And so, if you're going to move ahead, you say it's kind of like, if you've read, I'm not one, but if you've ever read the 12 Steps of Alcohol Anonymous. It's understanding and coming to grips with the problem is one of the very first steps, acknowledging that you have a problem, if you will. In some ways, we're at that phase as well when it comes to the environmental movement, where a number of the folks within the society have kind of come to grips with, we are impacting our environment in various ways. And the next step is, how do you change your behavior in a way that is sort of fundamental to your own nature? Again, driving cars, where you buy food, etc. Those things it's not as simple as saying, well, I'm going to start spending more time with my kids, one simple thing. These are choices where it's so rooted in the way our own personal behavior. So you have this disconnect to some extent with a report by the United Nations looking at global ecosystem health. And then you talk to Joe or Jane Smith in the town of Colonie, and they say, well, what can I do about it? Well, you can do a lot of things. That's the problem is that kind of think global, act local thing has certainly a ring of truth to it, for sure. But if you're thinking global, and those ideas behind the problems that are at a global scale start scaring you to the point where you say, well, I just can't have any impact. I'm just one out of 6 billion people. I'm helpless. And so maybe a better way to look at it is think local and act local. Because if everyone is acting in that way, then you're in effect addressing the global problem anyways.
Yeah, and you might have a community where an individual, or maybe you're fortunate enough to be in a community where a couple individuals and are observing this kind of sensitivity, and yet your neighbors are not. I mean, so there's always that challenge of you're one among. But I guess if you just sustain your belief, at least you're doing your part. I'm also baffled by, and I know this goes into all other areas, is this really questioning the scientific information. I mean, that science is really fact. And that these things are real. It's not fabricated. It's not made to create some other kind of thing. And politicizing environmental issues, to me, too, is just horrific. It really just deflects and diffuses and makes it hard for some people to understand what the real issues are. And
there's actually a great book by a fellow by the name of Ross Gelbspan called The Heat Is On, which kind of goes to this point. He really looks at, he was a Washington Post reporter, and now has become an advocate to some extent at looking at journalism and how journalism has interacted and treated environmental news stories. You look at the scientific community, and the vast majority of the scientific community, climatologists, et cetera, have through the research have come to the conclusion that we have had an impact on our climate. And you have a very small number of dissenters. And yet if you look at the coverage on the evening news between the we believe it's true, we don't believe it's true, it's 50-50. So it's a disproportionate coverage on the evening news to what the actual scientific community becomes. So you have this perception problem right from the start. Gelbspan goes into looking at how the stakeholders that have a vested interest in either stalling the problem or at least trying to push it under the rug, whether it's the oil lobby, auto lobby, et cetera, at least in the early years, were really connected to some of the scientists, the smaller group of scientists that were dissenting on this opinion. Now you do have this kind of tip that's happened where you have automakers like Ford. You have maybe even British Petroleum a number of years ago decided to redefine themselves. They're no longer thinking of themselves as an oil company, but an energy company. So from their perspective, if we rethink, ideas are powerful things. If we rethink of ourselves as an energy provider, then oil is just one means. And on the heels of that, they purchased a solar division to look at solar technology, et cetera. The unfortunate fact, I think, is recently they sold it off again. But talk about sustaining. But you mentioned the one person or an advocate within a neighborhood or a community. There's some interesting data on that as well. For a number of years, a group called Roper Starch has done surveys of consumer behavior, people's buying preferences and habits. And up until recently, you could look at the segment of, in those surveys, roughly 10 to 15% of people could be defined as what they call green-hearted. They would spend a little more money for a product that has an environmental attribute to it. They're the ones that were the first people to buy the Toyota Prius or Honda Insight. They're the ones that will spend a little extra money for the recycled content plates, paper plates, that sort of thing. And those are the folks who kind of already get it. They're already interested. You have a big segment of consumers that, all things being equal, I'm on board. So if that Prius, as long as it has a good CD player, has good pickup, and comes in my favorite color, and it gets good gas mileage, good, I'm good. Yeah. And then you have a really small segment of people who are just what they define as kind of brown. They're not interested in this at all. Within the last even 6 to 9 months, that 10 to 15%, there are some signs that are showing that segment is growing. As we sort of alluded to, the awareness right now is really piqued interest. And so a lot of what we've been doing is really trying to connect with that, certainly connect with that 10 to 15% of people, but also connect with that larger segment of society that if you can make an economic argument as well, if you can say that, if we're going to work with the town of Williamston in North Carolina, which is one of our Sustainable Communities Program members, if we can convince them and work with them to understand that a lot of creating a plan for the community is that a central piece of that is water conservation, because in North Carolina they're having a lot of water issues. And there's a long-term kind of, the community has told us and told the leadership there that there's a real concern over water issues. If you can look at something as simple as a giveaway program, which they did, where they gave away low-flow shower heads, et cetera, to the community, and then measure the overall water use in your community and see if you can reduce your per capita water use, then you either will stall or maybe even avoid investment in a new water plant or bringing in water from the outside. There's a financial argument to be made to try to take those environmental steps. Going back to golf, a lot of people have a perception of, or sometimes a very accurate perception of golf courses as being very highly manicured, mowed, et cetera.
Yes, exactly.
A lot of what we do in our programs is ask a very basic question of the people who are managing those courses and say, where are there areas on your golf course where people by and large do not hit their balls, either errantly or otherwise, that you can stop mowing and let go back natural, and have, not only you're creating more habitat, wildlife habitat, but that's, and you can measure it, X number of hours you're now not mowing, X number of gallons you're now not spending on mowing those areas. And so it's simple conservation in the purest sense, energy conservation.
It makes perfect sense, and these are easily identifiable areas.
Absolutely,
too, right?
Absolutely. And I think you can expand that to, to a homeowner, to a school, to a community. You can ask those basic questions to say, what is it that we are doing right now that we've just taken for granted for years, without actually just sitting back and pausing and saying, are these really the right things to do, not only from an environmental perspective, but also an economic perspective? Certainly the town of Colonie and its financial challenges are unique, but certainly every community right now is looking at budgets and looking at how to raise revenue, and so there are some really simple things to at least start with at a community level, for instance, and kind of connect people with that economic message as well as the environmental message.
It's sort of like saying, you can still be comfortable and still be, savvy in this, because I think people think of their comfort and their habits and all this stuff. Now, you mentioned Sustainable Communities Program, and we've talked about sustainability, and you just gave the example. Would you care to just expand on that a little bit? Sure.
I mean, maybe a real good way to start is a rough definition of what sustainability is. It's a phrase that's sort of thrown out there oftentimes. It's at its core, it's really about how do you meet the needs of the current generation without impacting adversely the needs of future generations? So what are you leaving to your kids and grandkids? Some common themes that any definition rests on is, you'll often hear the phrase, the triple bottom line, or three legs of the stool. It really comes down to the environment, the economy, and then social equity.
Okay.
Or if you're an environmental economist, it comes down to the environment, which holds everything, the economy, and then social issues. And so it's really about how do we as a society look at having a healthy environment, clean water, clean air to breathe, enough natural resources to feed people, to clothe people. Goes back to wildlife habitat. Any animal needs food, water, shelter, space, sort of basic needs. What are those natural resources that we need to live and thrive and survive? Having a healthy economy. Are people working? Do you have a disproportionate level of wealth going to a certain segment versus another segment? That's not sustainable. And then social equity. It's oftentimes termed quality of life issues. It's the arts, it's music, it's libraries. It's the value that various things like that play in quality of life in a community and places that you want to live. And so we've taken that kind of rough definition, and we have surveyed some really stellar models of communities that are addressing these issues out in California, Portland, Oregon, Santa Monica, California, et cetera, have their own sustainability programs going on.
Okay.
And we've created a set of what we call sustainability indicators for a community. And it's a really long menu, if you will, of ways to measure performance under those three legs of the stool, essentially. And we've also created a curriculum, if you will, or a process where a community will join our program. We do an initial site visit. We'll go down to the community. Right now we're working in Williamston, North Carolina, I mentioned. Eufaula, Alabama, of all places, was the first place we started working. Coconut Creek, Florida. Sarasota County, Florida.
Okay.
We worked at a county level, kind of that regional approach to things. And Henrietta, New York, actually. We also have a member up in Stowe, Vermont. We're working with Spruce Peak at Stowe, which is actually a ski resort, a private ski resort. But they're so interconnected with the community and the issues of the environment and use of the environmental resources, as well as jobs and things like that. It's been kind of a nice model to look at how do you work with a private, rather than a town or a city, a private sector development at that scale. And so we work with each of these communities. They join the program. They are then we're really helping them walk through and do, in the first stage, a very basic baseline of the community. What are the natural resources in the community that are valuable? If you're talking about someplace in the Hudson region, if you have a connection to the river, are you taking advantage of the riverfront? Are you taking advantage of the natural resources you have in the community? What are the human resources? In Eufaula, Alabama, they are a community without Williamston, a community without a town planner. And as a part of this process that they went through our program, they discovered that there was a retired planner that was interested in being a part of this community group that was being developed. He's now a part-time planner for them.
Okay.
And so it's how do you assemble your human resources as well within a community? Every community is loaded with lots of talented and smart people. How do you get them involved at this level? And so it's creating a citizen advisory group, asking some very basic questions about your community. In Williamston, just not too long ago, I received that the town board approved their sustainability vision or plan for the community that's based on our program. And so they're now going into the next step of really implementing that plan. And you're looking at in Williamston, North Carolina, a community where it's roughly 50-50. I think it's about 50% are below the poverty line.
Okay,
so it's it's a challenging community to work in. But they're asking basic questions like, where's our food coming from? How do we measure over time having more locally grown food? How do we support that as a town? Because we know there's value in that. How do we look at, as I mentioned, water resources? How do we lift up and help to engage the disenfranchised segment of our society? So there's a lot of really challenging but very interesting things that you can do when you start putting a framework around it. And that's really all we're trying to do. We're trying to facilitate that kind of community conversation, that level conversation, in a way that will end, we sort of look at it as two paths where we're trying to get the people who live in those communities to think and act differently. But we also want to look at the policies. And so the end result is really looking at the comprehensive plan for a community and saying, how do you make it become a sustainable comprehensive plan? So it's not just about economic development, which they often are, but you're really looking and asking questions like, where should land be developed? Should we be driving business down this part of our town, given our landscape? What do we want our community to look like 50 years from now? And you're really involving not only the economic questions and quality of life questions, but we're trying to bring in that third piece and say you should also be asking environmental questions as a part of that comprehensive planning process. So it's kind of a dual process of government or local government involvement, as well as the citizens and the businesses and the schools and everyone who is living within those communities.
The town of Colonie did a comprehensive plan, and the product is a good one. And I know the planner for the town, and it has made mention of some of the initiatives or whatever have you. I guess I wasn't surprised, but it was interesting to know they had all these public forums, they had all these opportunities for people to have input. And in many cases, they were lightly attended. Mm-hmm. And when it came to the business community also, there was an important need to have the business community come into this whole process as well. As it got closer to the end, I think there might have been a bit more rallying of the troops together. Mm-hmm. And I know, there's the bike path. We want bike paths all over town. But it's getting that community to, I guess, buy into the process. Mm-hmm. Because if they do, then, they're partners with the planners. And it can't be saying, look what you've done. Right. You've made this decision. You haven't even considered us. And yet when you invite them, You know, I guess
Right.
it's like the school vote. You know, you come if you're
Right.
really interested or not. But
It's you know, we've as I mentioned, Eufaula, Alabama was the very first community we started working with, and the president of the board, Ron Dodson, years ago was the person who actually started working with them, kind of trying to learn and help create this program. And one of the lessons that he likes to pull out, and we still try to remember this in the program, is sometimes it comes down to beer and barbecues. It's not all about
Exactly.
It's not all about a public forum somewhere else. Sometimes the planning board, the planning body, the committee has to go to the people they're trying to interact with. In fact, it was we held last week a meeting just down the road here at the Crossings.
Yep.
It was the third of a set of meetings that we've been doing. Sustainable Community Summit is what it's called. It's essentially a leadership summit. We invite local community leaders, planning board members, mayors, etc. About 100 folks showed up, and we've done one in North Carolina and one in Florida previous to this. And that was one point that was brought up at this meeting was, there was a planner who stood up and said, I think we need to start holding these meetings in their homes, so to speak,
exactly.
rather than
exactly.
in
The
somewhere
formal
else.
setting, the
And that's really, certainly in Eufaula and Williamston and the other communities we work in, I think one of the ways to make that change process more long-lasting is that before you have any meeting, maybe it comes down to beer and barbecues first, and just starting to ask some questions at the community level, putting out information. Here's what the plan looks like right now. Here's some, and then you start getting into in Eufaula, again, the community where about 50% are below the poverty line. You have a pretty large disenfranchised segment of the population, like most communities, I suppose. They would have very good turnouts at these planning meetings simply because there was a lot of legwork done before they even happened to sort of engage the citizens. And we've tried to build that within our program approach for the Sustainable Communities program, where the very first stage is really about really simple, hopefully fun environmental projects at a community level, bird boxes, things like that are kind of simple things to do, but get people asking questions, get people thinking a little bit differently about your community before you start diving into zoning requirements. So I think you're certainly right. There's a connection there. Without knowing what the process was like for the town of Colonie, I do think that there's a part of this that is really connected to engaging citizenry in a new way when it comes to this.
I'm thinking of it as creating the buzz, really getting it to be something that people, and it's like you see in the political arena, going to the diner, going to the barbecue. Really, people are not threatened by the formality of it, and it really does come home to them.
That's right. And I think, if you've gone to these types of, government forums, the room layout, the lighting, the atmosphere oftentimes lends itself for antagonism rather than cooperation and sort of collective action.
Us, them kind of
That's
stuff.
exactly what it is. And so I think there's a part of that if there was any lesson that came out of this, sort of was strengthened from this summit we put on, but certainly in the programs that we've been, the program members we've been working with, is this idea that you have to really think differently about engaging the broader community when you look at sustainable plans for a community or comp planning process, that sort of thing.
Okay. Pause for a second. Okay, Kevin, something we haven't talked about is the Audubon Cooperative Sanctuary Program. I know we discussed it before we did the show today, so give us some more detail about that.
Sure. In many ways, the Audubon Cooperative Sanctuary Program was the precursor to where we are now in working with communities. It's really a program that's designed to work with individuals at particular properties, sort of at a property scale. So as opposed to working at a community level, let's say with our Sustainable Communities program, the organization will, and our staff ecologists will work with folks with it for a school or a golf course or a business, so individual property level. And the whole concept behind it, the program, if you think of the name, Audubon, certain connections there, cooperative. We're really trying to get people to think of themselves as being a part of the solution, cooperating in addressing and looking at wildlife habitat issues, water quality, conservation issues, etc. Sanctuary, so a cooperative sanctuary, the idea that you don't have to have a park somewhere else. Your own home can be a sanctuary if you manage it right. right? So there's all different levels of wildlife, within any sort of community level. And so it's how do you get people that are managing land? If you own a home, you're managing land,
Right.
usual.
Okay, good.
If you have the library is managing land. You have landscape around here. Asking questions like, do we need to mow everything? Can we create a butterfly garden? Can we look at putting up nest boxes to increase bird population on the site here? Can we then include Boy Scouts in that project? So you're now connecting the Boy Scouts with these kinds of projects, kind of community engagement. So there's a real fun aspect to this program where you can really look at the environmental, certainly the hard, cold environmental performance of a facility, but also get to the fun stuff, which is education, involvement, outreach within not only your staff or your family or the community, and get people involved and kind of reconnected with nature again.
I love it. I love it. Pulling the pieces together.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you keep talking about we, and I know you're not a one-man band.
Oh, no.
Or are you?
No. Not at all. Not at all.
You have split personality?
Not at all.
No. So, when you have a team of people?
Absolutely, a great team. We're headquartered just south of Albany.
Okay.
We have a staff of 12 people that work out of an office on something called the Hollyhock Hollow Sanctuary. It's a 140-acre nature preserve. We have our offices there as well. It's open to the public for hiking, etc. We don't do a lot of programs and environmental education programs on site there, but it certainly is open. We have another office in Kentucky, of all places, with a 3-person office. They're in charge of what we call our Audubon Signature Program, where we work with developers. It's
Okay.
really for the new development program. And really top-notch staff of ecologists and folks who are familiar with wildlife habitat issues, with water issues, etc. We partner with quite a few folks, universities around the country, trying to provide information and deliver environmental information in a way that is useful to the audiences that we're working with, the stakeholders we're working with, certainly. So, and yet at the root of it is really the thousands of members that we have. I mean, because really what our organization is designed to do is not to say, have us come in and we're going to help save the world.
Right.
We want to provide information so that you can.
Like teach the teacher kind of
That's
thing.
what it is. We're really trying to, a lot of the actions that are taking place when we measure our own performance as an organization, how much water did we save this year, did we increase habitat on lands across the country and around the world. It's those members that are doing that
Yep.
work, the heavy lifting, if you will. We're just trying to facilitate that, provide information, make connections within the community. Every member has to create an advisory committee, which is people within their own community that have an expertise, ornithologists, you name it, to come in and help as well. And so we're trying to build that sustainability of programming on those sites as well.
Nothing beats talking to you, I'll tell you that much, but I know the web page you have has a lot of information on it, and links, and so people want to explore more of these things. So there's a community test basically, and your whole itemization of your core beliefs, and I mean really interesting things, and focusing an area, because you think Audubon, you think birds, you don't think of this really.
Right.
So I want to make sure that people go to the website, and you talk about volunteers and members, and how do
Yes.
people become members?
Yeah, real simple. If you go to www.audubоninternational.org, there's information there called programs, and we have a set of programs. Real simple way to find who you are. We work with schools and homeowners and communities. There's information there about the kinds of information you'll get, the cost of membership, etc. Each of our programs are different costs depending on how much it costs us to run those programs. And you can find pretty simple ways to get involved at that level, at that program level. Certainly, like any environmental organization, we accept donations, but we really want that programmatic involvement, because that's where the action takes place.
And I love the community approach. I like the local approach too. And it's not that we're not concerned about the polar bears falling into the water and all that stuff, but really being able to pay attention at home, I think, is so critical. And what a wonderful way to do it. So I hope we've inspired some people today to do such things. Now, unfortunately, we're running out of time. So is there anything that we have not touched that you'd like to just really briefly get across?
I think if there's a concluding message here is all is not lost, that there are very simple actions that anyone can take to start getting involved. It could be as simple as voting. You know, it could be as simple as what you decide to purchase at your grocery store. Those are actions. You're essentially taking actions to help protect the environment in a way that's new and different. Start simple, start small, and then try to get others involved.
Wonderful. Again, Kevin, thank you so very much for being a guest on my show.
It's been a pleasure.
I loved it.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining me on Getting to Know You. I hope you enjoyed today's program. I sure did. And will join us in the future. Until then, have a good one.